we continue with modernism. We mentioned last time that already in France there was a priest, a Jesuit, who realized the influence and the infiltration of Protestant ideas in the French clergy, even Kantian ideas. So one of the books was written in 1901, the other in 1902. So it's not that nobody knew what was going on. There were the priests who were following the developments of these ideas being infiltrated in seminaries and places like that of formation. So especially under Pope Saint Pius X, you have this offensive against the modernism, the decree Lamentabili Sane Exitu, with its 65 condemned propositions, also known as the Small Syllabus. And you have the date, July 1907. The encyclical Pascendi Dominici Gregis, September of 1907. The motu proprio Prestantia Scripturae, 1908, on the occasion of the 15th anniversary of the encyclical Providentissimus Deus. The condemnation of publications to the index and dismissal from teaching positions and excommunications. The anti-modernist oath appeared in 1910. A little history of modernism. Again, still we are in the introduction. Some of the names, most of the names we are going to see here are going to be studied in detail later. Modernism had its roots in France, with figures such as Maurice Blondel, we're going to see him, Lucien Laberthonnière, Edouard Leroy, who published the book Dogme et Critique in the year Pascendi was promulgated. Albert Houtin, who questioned the Bible on historical grounds. Henri Bremont, father of the history of spirituality in France. Alfred Loisy, father of Catholic modernism. And Joseph Tourmel, unmasked by Rome as late as 1930 and immediately excommunicated. At the same time, however, modernism was an international movement with several protagonists in Great Britain, such as Friedrich von Hugel, Maud Petre, and George Tyrrell, and in Italy, including Salvatore Minocchi, Giovanni Semeria, Antonio Fogazzaro, and Ernesto Buonaiuti. While in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands could not boast prominent representatives, there were, as in France, like among others, Marie-Joseph Lagrange, a number of suspects. Among them, Hermann Schell in Germany, and Albin van Hoenacker, and Pauline Laudeutz in Belgium, or Paulin, I guess, Paulin Laudeutz in Belgium. Before we continue, I have a little note. This Albert Marie-Henri Lagrange, don't confuse him with Garrigou. And you have the dates there. So the important thing, you can see the whole little biography I gave you here, but the important thing is that he was a professor of church history and Holy Scripture, and he knew all these languages. You can see Oriental language, Assyrian, Egyptian, Arabic, Hebrew. He also studied rabbinical literature. He was sent to Jerusalem. He opened the École pratique d'études bibliques. He founded the Revue biblique. So, while some contemporaries criticized the new scientific and critical approach to the Bible, Lagrange made use of it. And long story short, he was actually condemned. I mean, not excommunicated, but he was given an order of silence for the Revue Biblique to cease publication and to return to France. So eventually, he was using this critical historical method. He was suspect of modernism, very dangerous ideas. He was forbidden to publish, and he spent 45 years in Jerusalem. In 1935, he returned to France permanently for reasons of health and died there, so in 1938. So the problem here is, again, the historical method he used, suspect of modernism, but he was not condemned as others. But you have to always be careful when we have his, I believe, or we should have his works in the health section because of the danger of this historical method. Right. The Belgian suspects were forced to depend on the diplomatic skills of Cardinal Mercier in order to avoid a Roman intervention. In the Netherlands, let me see, I guess Henry Andreas Poels, who defended his doctorate in theology in Louvain in 1897 under Van Honecker, encountered resistance from his local bishop, forcing him to leave for Washington, where he later taught as its recently established at the Catholic University of America. So he came here, I guess, to spread a little modernism in the US. In the meantime, a US variant of modernism, Americanism, had already been condemned by Rome. So, as you can see here, Testem Benevolentia of Pope Leo. Modernism had a great influence on biblical studies and fundamental theology, apologetics. On November 17th, 1893, the day before the encyclical Providentissimus Deus, Pope Leo XIII, was established, before there were these guidelines established for biblical research within Catholic theology, Alfred Loisy was relieved of his teaching duties at the Institut Catholique du Paris on account of his deviant opinions and the aftermath of an article penned by the Institute's rector, Maurice Dulst. For Loisy, however, the encyclical was nothing more than an echo of the Council of Trent and Vatican I, as something bad, you see. It's nothing more than the repetition of this trend of Trent and Vatican I. So obviously, modernists, neo-modernists, etc., hate Trent and the First Vatican Council. The publication a decade later of these two red books, named after the color of the dust jacket, stand as clear evidence to his refusal to remain silent. L'Évangile de l'Église and autour d'un petit livre, that means around a little book, is translated. Autour d'un petit livre, were unsurprisingly banished by the Church's index. To the Church's index, together with Le Quatrième Évangile of 1903. Both works did indeed serve as an important source of inspiration for the propositions condemned in the decree Lamentabili. Loisy supported a historical critical reading of the Bible. So you see obviously the same themes here, whereby its various books were ascribed to human authors who put the story of God's relationship with humanity into writing using human language. So the explanation they have, or the system, is very simple. Faith is an experience of God. God is immanent. So the Bible, just stories written by human beings about this religious experience of God. So that's it. That's how they view things. There's no revelation. There's not external revelation. God coming and revealing His mysteries to man. But everything is immanent. God is in man, and so you analyze man's religious experience, and then that's it. That's religion and the origin of religion, the origin of the Bible, etc. Loisy's vision, which clearly ascribed a relative character to the Bible and its inspiration, was condemned by the magisterium, and he was excommunicated on March 7th, 1908, the feast of St. Thomas. Obviously, it was on purpose. Others who shared his vision, this thing with St. Thomas, there was one of the neo-modernists, I don't remember who he was, if it was Lonergan, that on the feast of St. Thomas, he used to say a ferial mass on purpose, in order to avoid saying the actual celebrated the saint. That's how much hatred they had for him. So, but here the church is saying, okay, you want war, we're going to condemn you, the feast of St. Thomas. So others who shared his vision, albeit less explicitly, were also sanctioned. For example, Edouard Leroy, or only just managed to escape sanctions like Lagrange. The fact that Loisy had taken the lead in the matter explains, moreover, why modernist ideas prior to 1907 tended to be referred as Loisism or Loisism. Loisism, or in French, Loisisme. Okay. Another interesting thing, you read the neo-modernists, de Lubac, Danielou, when they talk about Loisy or the modernists, they said, oh, they meant well, and they had the right, they proposed the problem, or they were right about how to propose the problem, what the problem was, but they were wrong about the solution they gave. So we had to give another solution. That was the new theology, which was essentially the same thing as modernism, but with some different sauce, but it's the same thing. But they all praised the modernists. For them, they were the heroes of the time that were a little. They went a little too far, and the magisterium reacted. But both the magisterium and the modernists were wrong. So the modernists are the ones. The new theologians are going to give you the moderate, solution to everything. In order to respond to and counter modernist tendencies in the domain of biblical research, Leo XIII established the Pontifical Biblical Commission in 1902. Using the question and answer procedure, the Commission determined the truth contained in the Scriptures and exegesis which 5 years later Prestantia Scripturae would make binding, with as much concern as his predecessor about the influence of biblical innovators in the seminaries. Saint Pius X addressed a document to those responsible for priestly formation with guidelines for the study of sacred scripture. 10 years after the obligation to take the anti-modernist oath, Benedict XV promulgated the encyclical Spiritus Paraclitus, 1920, on the occasion of the 1500th anniversary of the death of Saint Jerome, the translator of the Vulgate. In the spirit of Saint Jerome, Benedict insisted on the divine inspiration of the Scriptures, in spite of the fact that human beings were its physical authors, as instruments. And there's a note here from one of the books I follow here on the New Theology. According to Mette-Penningen, it was only in 1943, with the promulgation of Pius XII encyclical Divino Afflante Spiritu, that the door was opened to a historical critical approach of the Bible. So it shouldn't surprise you, but that was one of the problems of Pius XII, that even in the documents in which he condemned errors, he left a little door open for further studies, etc. One of them, the use of the historical critical approach. So an assault on the scriptures was an assault on the roots of faith and theology, and thus likewise on the domain of fundamental theology. The emphasis on the historical perspective ultimately led to the emergence of a number of figures who supported an alternative understanding of revelation, tradition, and truth. The impetus given by the publication of Maurice Blondel's dissertation L'Action, 1893, was a direct critique against the immutability of dogma. Georges Tyrrell and Edouard Leroy, among others, favored bringing history into play in relation to fundamental theology, thereby introducing the notion of development into the debate. Revelation, truth, and dogma, it was argued, could also be studied from the perspective of their development, and not only as fixed and unassailable formulations. Both the world of biblical exegesis and that of fundamental theology witnessed a variety of controversies. This means, I put here a note for you, heretics doing heretical things, which taken together ultimately constituted the modernist crisis. At the same time, however, modernism also introduced a crisis in the relationship between philosophy and theology, and thereby likewise in the way in which the Catholic faith was given expression. And this is obviously very important. That is why when Garrigou writes this article that I gave you as one of the mandatory readings, what is La Nouvelle Théologie où va-t-elle? So where is this new theology going? And his conclusion is very simple. It leads to modernism. And it's an abandonment, again, of the right way of doing philosophy. You have a bad philosophy, you end up with heresy. Leo XIII's response to the call for a philosophical foundation for theology made neo-scholasticism the norm and guideline against the modernist emphasis on subjectivity, experience, evolution, and relativity. The encyclical Pascendi Dominici Gregis points to ignorance of and disregard for neo-scholasticism as the intellectual roots of the modernist movement. The study of scholastic philosophy is proposed as a remedy. 7 years later, in 1914, Saint Pius X penned a motu proprio in which he promoted the study of St. Thomas in Italy, while the Congregation of Studies published a list of 24 theses establishing neo-scholasticism's basic principles and insights. The same congregation confirmed the 24 propositions as normative in 1916. And I think I mentioned before that this was very serious. That is, if you didn't teach the scholastic philosophy and specifically the 24 propositions, you were supposed to send a formal letter to Rome explaining why you were not teaching that in your seminary or in your convent or whatever it was. So it was serious, but we know that many of the priests and many of the bishops didn't enforce the law. So that was the law. They were supposed to subject yourself to the Pope and his and all of these documents promoting St. Thomas, but they didn't. Many people didn't pay attention. Many bishops, many religious orders, and that was a huge problem. I think I mentioned before that in the seminary was in Argentina. There was a book. It says Cartesian philosophy for seminaries, written in the 40s with imprimatur, everything like that. Cartesian philosophy. That was absolutely forbidden by the law of the church, but still they were doing it. Another book with an imprimatur of a cardinal, I remember, it was Hegelian, the synthesis between Hegel and St. Thomas, like the book. So I guess modernism was not dead at all. And all these new philosophies and these ideas were not dead. So lack of submission to the Pope here. Right. Even before all of the going back to or re-establishing, restoring Thomism, when Saint Alphonsus Liguori went to the seminary, he got Cartesian philosophy, just Descartes, pure Descartes. Not that you will study him as one, no, just Descartes. So he had to go and read the Summa by himself and study Thomism by himself. So that's how bad it was, that there was bad philosophy in all the seminaries. Even after the church trying to do their best, its best to correct the problem, priests and bishops didn't pay attention, so many of them. So this was the first measure of consolidation of neo-scholastic thought and method after the death of St. Pius X. The pontificates of Benedict XV and Pius XI were characterized by a consolidation of neo-scholasticism. For instance, in 1917, Canon 1366 of the Church's Code of Canon Law insisted that the doctrine, principles, and methods of St. Thomas should be used in teaching philosophy and theology. So it is in the documents, it's in canon law, it's everywhere, but still in 1923, on the occasion of the 600th anniversary of St. Thomas's canonization, Pius XI promulgated the encyclical Studiorum Ducem, in which the angelic doctor's merits were lauded once again, and his link with the church teaching further underlined. The promulgation date already made the point. That was June 29th, the feast of Saints Peter and Paul. Modernism being exposed, the church proceeded to extirpate the cancer via a new secret institution, the Sodalitium Pianum. Obviously, we cannot go through all of the history. Probably you already saw it with Father Patrizi, but this was like a secret police trying to find the modernists and to take them from the positions, especially of teaching, an organized and hidden antidote. This body, better known as Laberthonnière, was founded and led by Umberto Benigni. Don't confuse him with Bunigni, please. In 1909. The primary task of this secret international network was to detect, expose, accuse, and report on modernists. So obviously that should, if there is a pope, we had to do this, but 100 times stronger, give all of the money to that Sodalitium. The anti-modernist movement was a Catholic integrism. The anti-modernists' contact vehicle at the time was the periodical La Correspondance de Rome, while the Sodalitium Pianum was discontinued in 1921 at the end of the pontificate of Benedict XV, this did not spell the end of the integrist anti-modernist movement, which we are the representatives right now. So I guess you don't have the next set of notes, right? So we'll continue without you having the notes. I guess you have to listen only. And if you think, oh, okay, now with Vatican II, everything is so clear that now we know Vatican II's modernism has produced all of this evil. Now it's very clear, especially with Francis, the synod and synodality, etc. You will be wrong. I mean, the errors just always come back. Up to this day, these people criticizing Vatican I instead of criticizing Vatican II, and so-called traditionalists are doing that. So it never ends. So even if we have a true pope in the future, we condemn all of the philosophical and theological errors. We have a new syllabus. It will not end. It's like human beings are always going back to error. So the fight never ends. Something to keep in mind. So the first person we see here, the first modernist, is Laberthonnière. So, and you will have the notes. I will give you on Monday. Sorry, on Wednesday you have the quiz, so I guess on Monday. Lucien Laberthonnière, his dates are 1860. Let me put it here so you don't have it. Let's see. French philosopher, and the philosophy of religion he studied, and a leading figure in the modernist movement in the Roman Catholic Church, was born at Chazelles. He studied for the priesthood and was ordained as an oratorian in 1886. He then taught in various institutions, mainly in the College of Juilly, where he became rector in the year 1900. Laberthonnière was influenced by philosophies of life and action, so you see already the problem. He mentions Maine de Biran and Etienne Boutroux as the two philosophers who had most impressed him. Maurice Blondel's philosophy of action was another important formative factor, although Laberthonnière later found it moving too far toward intellectualism. He himself not only advocated a pragmatic point of view, but also had an intense distaste for intellectualism and speculative philosophy, basically Thomism and all of the good stuff. In particular, he had no sympathy for the attempted Thomist synthesis of faith and reason, believing that the task is not to conciliate these two, but to choose between them, either faith or reason. His teachings brought him into conflict with ecclesiastical authorities, and his principal writings were put on the index in 1906. In 1913, he was prohibited from further publication. So, can you maybe in favor or against the death penalty for heretics, but at least with regard to the effect of heretics staying alive, it's not good. So, again, not advocating for the death penalty, but just saying it will be for the common good, maybe. Laberthonnière was not concerned with merely speculative philosophy that is constructed apart from life. He believed that the purpose of all philosophy is to give sense to life, and this motivation underlies even metaphysics. You see, they make an ontology out of this experience and the existential whatever concerns of man. whether or not the metaphysician is aware of it. In the long run, the test of a philosophy must be its viability or its aptness for life. So this sounds like Bergoglio, because it's the same thing. Bergoglio, again, even religion for Bergoglio and the Catholic Church, if it doesn't produce a piece of bread for the poor, it's not good. So everything has to be concerns for like social issues, present life problems. So if it is not about that, if it's about dogma, doctrine, what you have to believe, eternal salvation, the possibility of hell, things like that, those don't concern the present life. Concern the next, but I guess that they don't remember. For these people, the next is already guaranteed. You go to whatever, heaven. So everything has to be this life. And the criterion of philosophical truth is a pragmatic one. We mistake the character of philosophy if we think of it as a theoretical enterprise resulting in a system of propositions linked together by abstract logical principles. So all of this, the attack against Thomism. A philosophical doctrine has a moral as well as an intellectual character, so that a worthwhile philosophy has to be worked out by living. The other thing is the good philosophy. I mean, Thomism and St. Thomas, a saint, doctor of the church. So holiness has been produced by the right doctrine, obviously, and the right philosophy. These people have produced the blessing of sodomy. So I think the life thing doesn't work. The test of its truth is whether it can be illuminating when brought to bear on the problems of life. So all of this same garbage. But this person died in 1932. He's already telling you the same things that the Synod on Synodality is telling you today. Although Laberthonnière apparently held that all philosophy has a pragmatic or existential motivation, even if this remains unconscious, he also believed that some philosophies have been much more successful than others in relating to life. The theme of one of his principal writings, Le réalisme chrétien, l'idéalisme grec, so Christian realism and Greek idealism, he wrote that in 1904, is the contrast between two supposedly extreme cases, Greek philosophy and Christian thought. Greek philosophy was concerned with abstract essences, conceived God as static and immutable, as if God were not immutable, and proposed the life of pure contemplation as its ideal for man. In contrast to such idealism or intellectualism, Christianity, and here by Christianity means the little movie that he has in his mind, is not real Christianity. Christianity is presented as a realism. Its concern is with the concrete life of action, and God himself is conceived as active, the living God of the Bible. So remember Bergoglio's God of surprises? He says God is a God of surprises. It's all the same thing. So hence, the truth of Christianity cannot be reached by intellectual contemplation as if it were something external to us. Such truth as Christianity teaches is concrete and intrinsic to life, so that we grasp it only in living and in recreating this truth in ourselves. These ideas about religious truth had already found expression in Laberthonnière's Essais de philosophie religieuse, Essays of Religious Philosophy. He wrote that in 1903, where it is maintained that the doctrines of religion are to be understood not as general truths of the same kind as scientific truths, but as concrete truths that must be brought into experience unrealized if we are to understand them and know their value. Although these views lean strongly toward pragmatism, Laberthonnière did not think that religion could be reduced to a purely practical affair, or that it could be adequately explained in naturalistic terms. It is significant that in spite of the harsh treatment that he received from the Roman Catholic Church, he remained devoted to it and believed his philosophical views to be compatible with its teaching. So basically, he didn't want to leave the church, the externals. I mean, but it seems he kept his ideas, but he never left. If he went far toward abolishing the traditional distinction between the natural and the supernatural, that's not very good. So he wants to abolish the natural and the supernatural. This is not to be understood as the reduction of the latter to the former. Rather, it was Laberthonnière's conviction that the natural is itself already permeated by divine grace. You see, this is what we mentioned before. When the incarnation happened, humanity became this supernatural, sacred, saved, redeemed. So it's not that we have to confuse the two orders, it's that the natural has become supernatural or has the grace now. So thus we should look for God not in some upper or outer realm, but in the immediate world where he is active, and especially in the depth of human life itself. Again, this is the immanence that was condemned in Pascendi. This is independent of whether you have the virtue of faith, in the infused virtue of faith. The beginning of salvation of the Council of Trent says, this is independent of that. So you can have this experience of God. God is in you and manifests in your life. In life itself, human life, God manifests itself. That's the immanence of God. So all of this is condemned. He also had an important study on Descartes, so we'll obviously go back to that. So it was published after his death, but 2 volumes on Descartes. If you want to read them, yes. So that's Laberthonnière again. Again, there's much more to say, but it's enough when the little things we said about him is more than enough when you see someone else saying, oh, he was influenced by Laberthonnière. It's bad news. So, and the next one we can start now, because why not, is Blondel. I have a very brief thing of Blondel. I will give you more later, but so he was not a priest, he was a layman. He was a French Roman Catholic philosopher. I mentioned before in his correspondence with Garrigou-Lagrange, he says, you are accusing me of heresy, but St. Pius X said that I was Catholic, and Pius XI said, and Pius XII, they all assure me of my orthodoxy. And Garrigou says, I'm not talking about your personal faith, I'm talking about your ideas objectively are heretical, basically. And so Garrigou made sure that some of his ideas in L'Action were condemned by the Holy Office. So that distinction has to be kept in mind. It seems that, it's very possible that Blondel was in good faith, he was a layperson, and just influenced by the bad philosophy. But even Garrigou says, I don't doubt about your personal faith. So if Garrigou didn't doubt, I don't know. It's possible to have a lot of errors, even heresies, and somehow keep the virtue of faith. At least it seems to have been the case. He was never excommunicated. So, and he received a certificate of orthodoxy from Pope Pius X. So it's very strange. But he's Vatican II. So Blondel is Vatican II. Influenced all the bad people. And again, it's because of a bad philosophy. So his philosophy was very existentialist, philosophy of action. French Roman Catholic philosopher. Blondel was born in Dijon, educated at the École Normale Supérieure, where he was a disciple of Léon Ollet-Laprune, to whom he dedicated his thesis published as L'Action, which he presented at the Sorbonne in 1893. He was professor of philosophy at Aix-en-Provence, I think it's pronounced, from 1897 to 1927. L'Action aroused much interest and controversy, a lot of controversy, because of its originality and also because of its lack of orthodoxy. Blondel claimed that from purely philosophical premises, he had reached theological conclusions. So I will repeat that. From purely philosophical premises, he had reached theological conclusions. So if you remember, I mentioned before, you have philosophy uses the light of reason, doesn't use revelation, just the light of reason, and can deduce things about God and religion, is able to. Theology uses the major premise, revelation, and the minor premise is going to be reason. But in theology, you always need revelation. But here, Blondel is saying, no, I just reached theological conclusions just using philosophy or reason. Unlike the positivists who were dominant in the university and the scholastics who controlled the theological schools, Blondel worked from a subtle analysis of what was involved in human experience, you see, induction and existentialism, and maintained that it pointed to and in the end required the supernatural. So this Blondel, this idea, Karl Rahner, Danilou, de Lubac, they all will take this, that if you analyze the nature of man and you analyze the human experience, you can see that the supernatural is required. And that's bad, because you cannot know that without revelation. So at the most, you can know that there's a desire, which Garrigou says is an inefficacious desire for the supernatural, but inefficacious. That is, that you cannot, obviously, without the grace of God, reach it. But here, his idea and his way of thinking is that you cannot understand man without the supernatural. This is Karl Rahner. Actually, Rahner is going to say the same thing. Man is not, you cannot understand man without the supernatural, without grace. Thus, by what was known as the method of immanence, he arrived at the transcendent, you see. By immanence, he arrived at the transcendent God. So, by analyzing or finding God in humanity, in the human experience, you arrive at God outside of man. By action, so remember his book or his dissertation was L'Action. By action, he did not mean only activity, but all that is involved in the human response to reality, including affection, willing, and knowing. Blondel was not a lucid writer, and his teaching was regarded as complicated and obscure. He spent the rest of his life, this is kind of funny, he spent the rest of his life in trying to clarify his meaning and seeking to distinguish his ideas from those of others with which they were liable to be confused, because obviously the things he was saying very easily could have been interpreted as absolutely heretical. So because he was Catholic, he was trying to be orthodox. He said, "No, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean this. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that." But he was saying this. He was saying the things. So he tried just to avoid being misinterpreted. But at the same time, how you interpret him when he's saying you cannot understand man without the supernatural? How you have a benign interpretation of that? So he waited for many years before publishing a revised edition of L'Action, which, with other works, won for his thought a widespread influence in France. Most important among these other works were Le Problème de la Philosophie Catholique, the problem of Catholic philosophy, in 1932, La Pensée, the thought, I guess, in 1934, L'Être et les Êtres, so again, being and beings, 1935, and La Philosophie et l'Esprit Chrétien, Philosophy and the Spirit of Christianity, in 1944 to 1949. One of his closest collaborators was Lucien Laberthonnière, the one that we just saw. But eventually Blondel fell out with him, as he did with most of his contemporaries. He was involved in the modernist movement and obviously desired a renewal of the Church's teaching, but he insisted that he did not share the views of modernists such as Alfred Loisy, Edouard Leroy, and Friedrich von Hugel. Though sometimes threatened with ecclesiastical censure, he avoided it and indeed received a certificate of orthodoxy from Pope Pius X, St. Pius X. So we can stop here. I will add some more material here. Especially I can read in class that part of the correspondence with Garrigou-Lagrange, which is very interesting. So this is another point, that when Pascendi explains modernism, tries to make a system of it, and it's a good thing because you expose them and the main ideas. But it's also true, I think Loisy said, either Loisy or Leroy, that there is many modernisms as there are modernists. So not every modernist will have the same exact set of ideas. So here, again, this Blondel tries to separate himself from these other people, but nevertheless, he has many of his ideas were actually bad and were actually condemned by the Holy Office. So, but something to keep in mind, that not all modernists will agree among each other in everything.